Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Doctor Will See You Now. This evening's recording has had a couple of hiccups, not least because of the storms that have been raging around the UK at the moment. But I am pleased to say that we've made it to this Thursday evening, and it is an extreme pleasure and a thrill for me to welcome somebody into the consultation room who has to be one of the first crime fiction authors I ever had the pleasure to work with. So please, everybody, if you will, welcome Margaret Murphy. Good evening, Margaret. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for the invitation and that lovely introduction.
It's a total pleasure. Margaret and I met I think it's about 6 years ago, when the university that I worked at then held a fabulous festival of people getting into crime fiction writing. And I had to introduce Margaret. And ever since that moment, you know, I listened to the program that she put together, and all about the interests of forensics and what you need to bear in mind when you plot it and things like that. And it's been amazing since then to watch what Margaret's been doing. And recently Margaret and I were together for an event at The Word hosted by Anne Cleves, and just fabulous, Margaret. I love what you do. And we're here really to celebrate your latest novel that came out in July, Before He Kills Again, published by Joffrey Books. And we'll be getting into, I'll ask you a little bit more about that as the consultation goes on. But for now, let me just read to the viewers a little bit. So, without doubt, an internationally acclaimed psychological thriller writer, former chair of the Crime Writers Association, and founder of the Murder Squad. And I want to just stop there along the way, because the Murder Squad, this was the 20th anniversary of the Murder Squad, and that's why I wanted you all at Newcastle Noir this year, to celebrate that amazing syndicate of crime writers. Would you give us a background to that and where you are now, 20 years later?
Oh, absolutely. Well, Murder Squad came out of my frustration, really, of being in a position where I was getting these terrific reviews, and yet the book sales weren't really following those reviews. And an editor actually said to me, you get such nice reviews, it's a pity it doesn't translate into sales. So I said, well, isn't that your job? You know, I write the books, you do the marketing. And she said, oh, it doesn't really work like that. And she was right on that point, at least. You know, reviews don't necessarily sell books. Marketing sells books. But very few people have a marketing budget. And I've very rarely had any sort of marketing budget. So there was the point I was at, I wasn't ready to just sort of throw up my hands in despair. You know, I tend to be a problem solver. I tend to look for ways to solve problems. I knew that I wouldn't be able to shout about my own books because it's just too awful, toe-curlingly embarrassing. But I did know some crime writers that I admired in the Northern chapter of the Crime Writers Association. So I approached them. There were 6 of us. And each of us had great reviews. I admired their writing. And I said, would you be willing to get together as a sort of consortium of writers to publicize and market our own work? And every one of them said yes.
Fabulous. So
in the original list, just so I don't forget anyone, all mid-list authors, these people, there was Anne Cleves, Martin Edwards, Chas Brenchley, Stuart Pawson, Kath Staincliffe, and John Baker, and myself. Now, sadly, Stuart Pawson died a few years ago, and Chas is now living in America, so he doesn't count as a northern crime writer anymore, although he is on the northwest coast of America, so you could possibly get away with it. But he's not writing crime fiction anymore. But the point was that all of these people were willing to put their individual talents in terms of publicity. Anne had great contacts in the libraries. John Baker helped us put together our very first website, which was quite unusual in those days. You know, year 2000, a lot of people didn't have websites. So we all work together in order to promote our work jointly, and also the work of the CWA and the other beautiful crime writers and the fantastic fiction that was out there. And unfortunately, some people, there are a few in the Crime Writers Association who saw this as a bit of a, well, one person described it as a schism happening in the Crime Writers Association. He was convinced that it was going to cause the sort of slow deterioration and the sort of breaking apart of the CWA. But, you know, now there must be at least a dozen groups of crime writers who are doing the same thing that we do. And I think it's made us all stronger for it. And the CWA is stronger now than it has been.
I was going to say, it strikes me that the CWA is a grouping that has withstood, and been through some really difficult times, and yet is still there and is still supporting crime writers and is still putting out fabulous crime fiction. Is what I love about it as well, is that it's willing to listen and it's willing to change, move with the times. And I just think testimony to the fact that there was no split. It didn't happen like that. It's a beautiful umbrella organization under which different groupings can exist quite naturally, whether that be genre or location and it's fine.
Yeah.
I think that's lovely. But what thrills me more than anything is to think that the Murder Squad, 20 years on, and I've watched you in action, as I said, at that fabulous event at the Word in South Shields, and you are the way you all work together, there's a synergy there that is, just to say, viewers, if you get a chance to go to an event run by this group, it's so special. And especially if you are considering writing your own crime fiction, I think, and because I know people that came away with so many ideas that you and the other authors, were quite happy to disseminate, to pass on, to encourage people. So, yes.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's so important to do that and to have that generosity. And I think one of the wonderful things about Murder Squad, and we now have 2 new members, who, by the way, we have Kate Ellis and Chris Sims. And we are a very disparate group in a lot of ways, because we write very different styles of fiction. But each one of us has something very special to offer. And I think that's why libraries, workshops and so on have been in demand right the way through. And we've done hundreds of them now. And one of the wonderful things, I do feel I ought to mention this, is that from that group of midlisters who we're all in very much the same position, we now have 2 Diamond Dagger winners, Martin Edwards and Anne Cleves.
Yeah.
We have Anne Cleves, who's had 2 wildly successful book series, which are now wildly successful TV series, Shetland and Vera, did I need to say it? And of course, Cass Staincliffe, who actually through a contact that Anne had passed on to the squad, got that creation of Blue Murder, which was a very successful TV series in its own right.
Yeah. And I think that's it. It's almost like from working together that then people, that things take on a much bigger dimension. I wanted to ask you what you wanted to do though initially. Did it work? Did you see a difference in sales from gathering together like that and going round?
I think that I was at the point with my first publisher where I could feel that things weren't going very well. Just having that kind of the backing and then knowing that I was willing to actually put myself out there, and I was willing to make that effort, got me a very good deal with a new publisher. Okay. So I'm grateful for that. I still struggle at times. I've had some really good deals. I've had some quite kind of poorly paid commissions as well. But as Anne says quite a lot, the great thing is that you've always got someone that you can loan to, and you can kind of share the highs and the lows with, which is fantastic. And this new venture with Joffy Books has just given me a new enthusiasm, really, for what I do. And it's helped me to return to my own name, which is quite nice as well.
So before we get there, because we will, I promise you, 2 questions, because I always ask, in case people aren't familiar with you, how did you get to become a crime writer? Because if I can tell, viewers, you've been a country park ranger, which I think is fabulous, a biology teacher, a dyslexia specialist, a visiting professor in creative writing. But for me, you are a crime writer. That is what you are. But when did that moment come for you? When did you say, I have to do this?
Oh, that's a really good question, because there was an actual moment when I thought, oh, I've got to get on with this. I'd always wanted to write. From being a child, I'd always wanted to write. But, working class background, a very traditional Catholic family, which thought that girls in those days should get married and have kids. I don't have any kids. I have my books. So I really didn't think I was going to get there. And I have a condition called lupus. I've had it since I was a child, but it wasn't diagnosed till my mid-20s. And when I got really ill during the 1990s and had a couple of TIAs, or mini strokes. And I remember saying to my consultant, when you say TIA, I think stroke. And he said, well, it's within the bounds of possibility. And that sent chills down my spine. I thought, well, if I want to do this, if I want to ever say that I got to achieve that ambition, which had been a lifelong ambition, I was in my mid-30s then, I had to get on with it. I had to do it. So actually, no, I was in my early 30s then, because it took me 5 years to actually find a publisher who wanted to publish my work. I'd written, I think, 3 books that were rejected, and finally I found my way to crime fiction, because I had been writing books that were kind of cross-genre, and they might be acceptable now as sort of crime and kind of supernatural. But in those days, it was considered a bit too. One of the quotes was too slipstream. So it wasn't until I'd started writing Good Night, My Angel that actually gelled it for me, and I'd actually started writing it as more of a ghost story, really, a haunting on the internet. And the internet had only just launched in about 1993, and I was writing this book, and it was a haunting. Then my agent said, I hadn't been published, but I did have an agent, and she said, no, darling, this is crime fiction. And it sort of like the penny dropped. I thought, yeah, what about stalking on the internet? I bet no one's done that yet. And it became a stalking on the internet. So it all worked very well.
I love the fact that, your beginning was at the beginning of the internet, and that, because you talk about stalking on the internet now, and I think probably many of us are just guilty of it anyway, with Facebook and things like that.
We all lurk, don't we?
We do. Yes, we do. We do, without a doubt. So psychological thrillers are what you're best known for. And I wondered, again, because, crime fiction being that beautiful, disparate array of subgenre, why did you go for that? Why the psychological?
I think I had always been fascinated by psychology. I did actually do a year of a degree in psychology after I'd got my environmental biology degree. I just sort of started doing the psychology degree, and it was partly to do with research for the dispossessed, I think it was. I tend to go a bit overboard with research, I have to admit. But
no bad thing.
It was something that I was really interested in. So it's something that's always been there. It's something I've always been fascinated by. And I had been through, well, a violent relationship in my early to mid-20s, and I kind of wanted to work out what it was that motivated people to be that way. So there were those aspects of it which I think naturally fed into the writing and made sense to me as a writer, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you. And then if we move to the forensic thrillers that you've written under the pseudonym of AD Garrett, what took you into that space? I mean, that's where I first met you, in that guise. And again, if people haven't read you as AD Garrett, honestly, please do, because it is, how do we say this? Seriously chilling and thrilling at the same time. So, yeah, tell us a little. Yeah,
thank you.
Tell us about that part of your career.
Well, I always feel that unless you are extremely lucky, you have to have a certain amount of resilience and grit as a fiction writer, but you also have to be willing to adapt. Now, by, I think it was the mid-2000s, I'd had 4 novels published with Hodder and Stoughton, and I had actually written the 3rd in the Rickman and Foster series, but they decided they weren't going to commission it. So I began writing a psychological thriller, and that I completed it, and that eventually went out to 6 or 8 editors who universally loved it and universally rejected it. So I thought, well, here I've got to adapt here. I've got to find some way around it. And I had seen a forensic scientist at, I think it was at the British Association for the Advancement of Science, which is a festival that happens every year. And I had been invited to bring together some authors to talk with scientists on a panel. And it was the first Murders, Mysteries and Microscopes. Now become a bit of a fixture. This was in Liverpool, and one of those people was quite interesting, and I wondered whether he would be willing to talk to me as a scientist and to develop those forensic science aspects, because I'm trained in science. I find science fascinating, and I wondered whether I could integrate that into the writing, and he agreed. So we wrote, well, I did the writing, but he kind of advised on the forensic aspects of 3 novels as AD Garrett, and that sort of ran its course. And then, glutton for punishment, I started writing the Ashley Dyer novels, and again that was going to be something else. And I started working with another forensic scientist, Helen Pepper, and she was kind of, she's so funny. I mean, I think you've met Helen.
I have, yeah, she's wonderful.
She's very dry,
yeah,
and wonderful to work with. So we worked quite closely on outlining. And again, I did the writing, but the outlining aspects and the forensic science, we worked on together. But I've always hankered after going back to those 2 novels that have been neglected. I felt had been neglected over those years. So I came back to, I got the rights back to my Backlist as Margaret Murphy.
Yes.
And that was a key thing, I think. But there was also that hankering after those 2 novels. And Before He Kills Again had a different title entirely. But Reg Hill had seen an early version of that. And I've written to him and said, look, it's been rejected. I'm really grateful, because he'd given us a lovely blurb. I'm really grateful to you, but they're not going to commission it. And he said, well, they're fools. He said, and you should not give up on this book. So although I did set it aside for 10 years, it's been there at the back of my mind the whole time. So I came back to it. I actually put forward a pitch to Jockey Books. I said, you can have my Backlist if you're interested. And I have these 2 books that never got placed. Are you interested? And to my surprise and joy, they were. They didn't get to see this novel until I'd gone through quite an exhaustive rewrite. So they took the Backlist. They hadn't seen the 2 new novels. And I submitted Before He Kills Again to them. Probably, it was only about a couple of months ago. They worked really fast. And it was during full lockdown, and I couldn't go anywhere to kind of release this pent-up energy. So I was finding jobs around the house, painting, decorating, cleaning, gardening, doing whatever I could just to be busy, because I just didn't know what the reaction would be. And thankfully, they really loved it, and they published it, and it's had some lovely reviews. So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, it's fabulous. I just, from this part of your writing history, what strikes me is the idea of not to let anything slip away, that whilst it might not be right now, to say it will never be right isn't so. You know, to hold on to a dream or a story, a narrative, a character, because chances are there'll be a moment that is right.
Yes, yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? And I feel that a lot of those psychological novels probably would fit quite nicely in the domestic noir category that is so popular now.
Yeah, yeah.
And yes, you know, it's just timing and luck has an awful lot to do with what happens in publishing, and you just have to be prepared to accept that, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because I know that's what Anne Cleves says, is it not? You know, you never know when that moment might arise. You've just got to be ready for it.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect moment then for us to turn to Before He Kills Again. And you have now in the series, you have these, you know, this duo, Detective Cassie Rowan and the psychotherapist Alan Palmer. And so, you know, for any of us, and I'm sure the viewers out there will want to get into these novels, who is Cassie and what does she mean to you?
Oh, right. Cassie is, she's quite young, she's very ambitious, she's very opinionated, she's a bit of a scouse gob. And quite often she doesn't know when to button it. One of her mates says to her, "You've got a mouth like the Mersey Tunnel, but you're not a fool." And I think that probably sums her up. She has got a good heart. She empathizes with people. So she's a person that I kind of admire, and she's taken on the care of her younger brother. Her parents had been killed in an accident, in a car crash, a few years earlier, and she took on the care of her younger brother, and he's now at the difficult teen stage. So she's coping with this while trying to be a detective constable, and she's not been a detective constable for that long. She's worked the streets and she's done the difficult stuff of kind of walking the beat in the tough areas of Liverpool, and now she's a detective. So she's a person that I have a lot of affection for. I can be a bit kind of, I'm not gobby.
I was going to say,
be a bit. I sometimes I don't know how quite to manage situations, and I think you just you reacted to that as though it's come across to you. I do apologize.
No, but what I find really interesting is, because again, I would, you know, people say, oh, you know, you can see that your character is based on blah blah blah, and I'm thinking, no, you are certainly not, you know, a gobby woman. But what I do see you as is somebody who's very tenacious, you know, and that I think is reflected in Cassie.
Oh, well, that's a nice thing to be reflected. That's lovely. I'll take that. Thanks.
Yeah. Not gobby at all. There's something else about her as well that I really, really like. And it's that idea of she and the, you know, those in high places, they don't necessarily get on, do they?
No. Well, conflict is such a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. But I so identify with her in that. Like, yeah.
And it's peculiar how you can transfer. I mean, you're an academic. I worked in teaching for 17, 20 years. And yet those things transfer so easily because people are people. People react the same way. You know, some people say, oh, no, we can't do that because we've never done that before. Some people will say, oh, you can't do that because you're this or that and you have been pigeonholed here. And that's something that I think Cassie kicks very hard against.
And I think unfairly they say she's not a good team player. Is that right? But is it the fact that she's not willing, again, she's not willing just to maybe let things ride, or she's not willing to give in? It's because she's driven by this, and if she's going, it may be that she leaves people behind because they can't keep up with her. They don't.
Yeah, I think she possibly doesn't explain herself very well. And she tends to take offense too easily, particularly with her female boss. And Ian Chan, who is the CSI, who tries to kind of say to her, look, you've got to try and put yourself in her position. And he's the one who's trying to reason with her all the time and trying to show her that she's a woman like you're a woman. She has struggles like you have. The policing still is quite a macho profession. And women do still have problems. Hopefully it has improved, but I don't think they're there yet. We only have to look at what's happening in the film industry to know that there is a long way to go for women to gain.
In so many areas, without a doubt. Yeah. Now, it brings me nicely to maybe a difficult question. So the notion of a serial killer and the notion of crime written on a female body, the notion of, those women victims. Was it difficult for you, because much has been discussed over the last 10 years, and even more so recently, about women as victim. And when it came back round for you to be able to publish this, were you at any point reticent to have that kind of storyline?
Of the victims, or particularly the kind of violence that happens?
The kind of violence that happened, yeah.
Well, I think women are victims too often. I can see where you're coming from in terms of what actually happens to these victims. But for me, it was almost an emblem. I don't want to give the detail because that's...
Of course, yeah.
It comes out during the story. But it's part of that element of control that I think a lot of men want to have over women. And, coming back to my own experience, it was more about control than anything else. And it was a lot about the insecurity that ex-partner had. So that aspect of, it wasn't just about, and I think I write this somewhere in the novel, it wasn't just about what is done to the women. He wants his victims to remember him every time they see themselves in the mirror. And that, to me, is the most awful aspect of it, because that is a constant reminder. It's hard enough, I know this personally, to recover from violence. But when you are constantly being reminded physically, visually, of that violence, it becomes so much more difficult.
Yeah, the psychological damage then, that the body may heal, but being constantly reminded does not help. And I think, again, for me, this wasn't necessarily an easy read.
No.
I think you throw up a lot of questions about the why someone would behave in the way that he does. Are we allowed to say, I don't know, because again, not wishing to give too much away, but are we allowed to say that his nickname is the Furman?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, that comes up very, very early on. And he's just got a bit of an obsession with fake fur that a lot of the street workers use as a kind of a kind of sign that they're available. So that's a kind of an aspect of, I suppose, of his superficiality, really, as anything. And it's something that plays into Cassie, because I think the important thing about Cassie is that she takes back control. And that also was an important thing for me in the writing, that she could be a victim. She almost was a victim more than once.
Yes.
But she takes control, and she works with the girls. She's working sort of undercover. They know who she is, but she's undercover in the sense that she is I suppose, bait to this serial predator. And she can take control back, but she empathizes with the girls. She understands why they do what they do. Her best friend Tasha, who is also a street worker, Cass disapproves of, because she's afraid that she will become a victim, that she's already had some nasty things happen to her. So it's more about concern than about judgment.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And again, I think that is that was an important element of the not judging of these women and the choices that they've made. But you know, that thing of their lives and how they are. I just wondered, again, coming back to the, you know, the time elapsing from having written it originally to the now, and you mentioned, you know, the rewrite. Did you have to change a lot because of the way, you know, the advancements in so many things?
Well, surprisingly, I mean, there were obvious things, like no one uses a modem anymore. We all have Wi-Fi, although I've had my problems with Wi-Fi over the last couple of days, and I've ended up with a cable attached to my computer. So, I mean, that's a bit of a throwback, really. But police don't use pagers, you know, that everyone has a mobile phone. So those aspects, those technical aspects, yes. Some of the forensic elements have advanced since it was first written. Not a huge amount, because DNA was obviously still was already in use in the mid 2000s. It's just the sensitivity of the tests and the rapidness with which the tests can come back, which has improved over those years. But I think, and this was just serendipitous, psychoanalytic psychotherapy has not changed greatly. There have been subtle changes, and some people take different approaches, and it's not so set in stone probably as it used to be. And there are different schools of thought about how psychotherapy and psychoanalytic work should work. So those things have changed subtly. Liverpool has changed because it was in the middle of turmoil and rebuilding when I was actually planning this book. But all I did was kind of move it on a little bit, and it's now a very beautiful waterfront, and I use that as an element of contrast, I suppose, between the richness of the city and the abject poverty that still exists within their sections of the community.
Yeah. Again, I thought it was an aspect that I really enjoyed. You know, that development goes on, that a city regenerates, but not everybody is taken along in that development.
Absolutely.
And then there's one other aspect, and I've read a number of people's comments about this, and I loved what one reviewer said, and it's about the way you use the fog.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And
the reviewer that I read said, could it be that the author has used the fog to talk about, you know, the blurriness, the mental blurriness, or you know, or the lack of understanding, or the lack of being able to grasp things? And I wonder, did you do that, or was it just because you liked the atmospheric notion of the fog?
There is a certain amount of pathetic fallacy that I do use in the novels, and there are always Gothic elements in the novels. So I think it was pretty preordained, shall we say, that I would use weather in some form or another. It's wonderful atmosphere, isn't it? And Liverpool in the fog, certain parts of Liverpool could be Victorian.
Yes. Yeah.
And certainly where the girls are plying their trade, up near the cathedrals, the two cathedrals, one either end of Hope Street, ironically, is a Victorian district, and it is very beautiful and very moody and atmospheric in the fog. I do like the interpretation that person has put on it. I might claim it as my own idea later.
Yes, that reviewer was totally correct. Yeah.
So astute.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So, if people, and I hope they do, wish to get hold of Before He Kills, thankfully now we're at the point where bookshops are open again, and so great in bookstores. Do you have a favourite bookshop in Liverpool?
I used to love the independents, but they've all but one is closed. I think News from Nowhere is still open. The main bookshop is Waterstones. Now, to be honest, I don't know whether they will stock this book, because Joffy, although they do paperbacks, they specialise mostly in digital format.
Okay.
So they are available. Shall I say?
Yeah. Well, Kindle. Let's say Kindle, and then we can.
Kindle. Yeah.
Then we don't have to mention the dirty word. Yeah. Oh no, but seriously, I think it's one of those difficult things of, getting hold of novels that we wish to get hold of. If they are produced in a certain way, then that is what we have to do. And and I think, it's never black and white. Nothing is ever truly good or truly bad. And I would hate to say to people, please don't buy a certain novel because you won't be able to buy it in a bookstore. Yep.
It would be a terrible shame. It's locking down an awful large section, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think it's certainly been good for me. I mean, when you think of backlists, and a lot of novelists are finding this now who have a sizable backlist, most publishers do not push a backlist, even if they take it on. But I'm fortunate that Joffy Books treats every single book as though it's a new book.
It's beautiful. I love that.
It's a fantastic thing. And where my books might have sold in very, very poor quantities, they've actually reached bestseller lists as a backlist novel, which is astonishing, really. So I have no complaints.
It's wonderful, because I'm really enjoying this aspect of our conversation, because I've never talked with any of the other authors about the notion of the backlist. And to me, it publishing always seems to be of the moment. Yes. What's out now? Okay, so that's good and it's really important. But if you weren't born at a certain time, when an author began, or if you weren't into crime fiction, let's say, when you began writing, why should people only be assigned to the now?
Yes, yeah. And again, the majority of authors, apart from that kind of top 5% whose novels will stay in print for many, many years, the majority of authors, their book may stay in print for 2 years, 3 years, if they're lucky. And it might go to, nowadays it would probably go to digital as well. So it would be there available, but it wouldn't be pushed as a novel that people ought to be reading. Because as you say, it's always what's new, what's next.
It's always what's now. And it's one thing that saddens me as well. And this is not to take away from any of those great names, not in the slightest. But the way, if you go into a bookstore, because the range of crime fiction authors is so glorious, and the physical space just won't allow for that. I get that. But it cannot be that 5 to 10 people, are the only people that are capable of writing good crime fiction. It cannot be, and again, as I say, no disrespect to those people. And I think it's one of the big driving things in me is to say, I want people who love crime fiction to know more authors.
Yeah.
It's just a passion that burns within. Oops.
Yeah. Actually, this is sort of, it's sort of linked to what you're saying, but I started doing, and I don't count myself as a blogger, but I started writing some reviews of books 2-3 years ago. And what I do is I call it shelf indulgence, because I only review the books that I happen to like at that particular moment. And some of them I read first 10, 15 years ago. Some I'm coming to new 20 years on. And I think, you know, there are so many wonderful books out there that have been missed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a
Exactly.
shame. And you know, it's nice to be able to just say, well, I like this one and this is why I like it.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully a few people will find it who would not have found it otherwise.
Margaret, I think here was an aspect that I never thought we'd touch on, but there's, you know, there's a real echo in what we're feeling about, you know,
Absolutely.
not losing good books and not losing, you know, great authors. Sadly, I'm going to have to draw this conversation to a close, though. I hate to do this moment, but what I always say to authors, I hope you and the Murder Squad, the plan is to just run, COVID permitting, run Newcastle Noir, what would have been 2020 and 2021. If you and the team can come, I hope you will.
We would love to.
Yeah.
You know, we all love the Northeast anyway.
Yeah.
I know it's Anne Cleave's spiritual home, and we all love coming to the Northeast, and we all love Newcastle Noir. So I feel privileged to have been given that invitation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I want to get the rest of the gang on as well over the next few months as they can. But you know, but please do tell them, you know, you have a date with destiny. Should all be well. But before I say goodbye to you, please everyone remember, before he kills again, if you like it serial killer grippy, then it's one for you. And it just remains for me to thank Margaret. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Delighted, and thank you so much for persevering when we had those technical problems.
It's a total pleasure. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Absolutely.
Good night for now.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.